My family, who is extremely homophobic, ended up kicking me out and replacing me with my best friend. My family is absolutely awful when it comes to topics about the LGBTQ+ community. Literally any mention of it and they get extremely upset, which sounds like they're suppressing something to me, but I had a friend that we can call Katie and my family absolutely adored her. Every Christmas they would buy her presents, she would spend family movie night with us, and they honestly treated her like she was the favorite daughter. So one day I made the decision to come out and I decided to talk to Katie about it. She was literally so supportive and so respectful that I gained the confidence to talk to my family about it. Bad idea. Hell striked and they immediately kicked me out of the house. So I found myself on a schedule of switching from couch to couch at different friends' houses. One particular night that was really hard for me, I decided to go visit them. I was missing them and also hopeful that they might accept me back in. And as I approached the house, my best friend was over there. She was playing games and doing family movie night with them, and so I decided to knock on the door. I burst into tears and went off on all of them. The absolute audacity. Later, my best friend texted me saying that she had a secret. Follow my Insta. Part 2 to my homophobic family kicking me out of the house and replacing me with my best friend. So I cannot believe the audacity of my family literally replacing me with Katie. Not only was she just over there for movie night, but they had actually moved her into my room, the room that I was raised in. I felt so much fury that I had to walk around the neighborhood for a while just to calm down. But eventually I just started to walk back to the house that I was staying at. Once I got in, Katie messaged me. She apologized for being such a bad friend, but then she said she had a secret. And she came out to me as bisexual and begged me not to tell my family. She felt like my family was her own and she didn't want to get kicked out. I was so frustrated that she was keeping the same secret that I had in my house, but she's getting to actually stay at my house. It has been a full year now and she is still with them to this day. But thankfully, I'm now living with my boyfriend and his family has accepted me as bisexual. I am honestly so much happier and better off. If you guys have a story that you'd like to share, follow me and DM me on Instagram.
Story time about how my crazy friend told me that she's attracted to me and I eventually had to block her. And yeah, she's a girl. And yes, this is my own story time. Oh yeah, and by the way, my makeup collab with Au Natural dropped today, so please click the link in my bio. I am so proud of it and it is super affordable makeup. So back in 2016, I was living in LA by myself. I was pretty much on set every single week and I auditioned almost every day. So I was meeting tons of people and actors at that time. And I was making lots of friends. During one of these auditions, I met this girl, let's call her Jess. Jess was super cute and funny and she made me laugh a lot. After the audition, she asked me if I wanted to share an Uber with her, which I thought was really sweet. But when we got into the Uber, she was asking me so many questions. Like, this girl wanted to know everything about me. Finally, we exchanged phone numbers, and when I got home, she sent me a text. She asked me to go out with her and her friends. I had so much work the next day, I told her no. That's when she calls me really angry, telling me that I need to live my life. You'll never guess what she said. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how my friend told me she was attracted to me and I eventually had to block her. If you haven't heard, I dropped my first makeup collab today with Au Natural. Please click the link in my bio to shop. It's super affordable makeup and I'm so proud of it. So she calls me on the phone after I told her I didn't want to go out, and she starts yelling at me. She says that I needed to live my life. Then she said, "Give me your address, I'm coming over right now to pick you up." That's when I was honest with her and I told her that she's putting a lot of pressure on me and that I barely even know her. Then she kind of backed off because she heard my tone of voice, and she told me that she was a very intuitive person, that she could tell that I was holding something back. I told her we could hang out that weekend and she said fine. Then she proceeded to text me every single day. Really thought we were building a friendship, so we talked about a lot of stuff. And I was finally happy to have a real girlfriend. Or at least I thought. Finally, the weekend comes around, but I get my period. My periods are pretty bad, so I told her that I wouldn't be able to go out. Again, she calls me super angry. She said I needed to man up and basically take drugs, like the green stuff. I sort of laughed on the phone and this made her even more angry. That's when she hung up. But then she calls me right back. Part 3 is up. Part 3 of how my crazy friend told me she was attracted to me and eventually I had to block her. By the way, the blue pigment is from my collab with Au Natural, so please go click the link in bio to shop. Super affordable. So after she hung up on me, she calls me right back. That's when I told her that she was being really strange and I just didn't like it. She apologized and begged me to come out. Finally, I said yes because she was just being so annoying. So I go out with her and her friends for a few hours. Then I literally had to beg her to let me go home. Throughout the night, she kept holding my hand and kissing it. Another 2 weeks passed by and we just kept texting, but I definitely knew that I was not going to go out with her again. But of course she invites me out again. That's when I told her that I didn't really think our friendship would work out. 30 minutes later, she tells me to look out my window. Yep, she showed up to my apartment. Then she told me that I was confused, as in I didn't know if I liked men or women. I told her I definitely like guys. She told me she just wanted to take me out on one date. I asked her how she found out where I lived, and she said she followed me from the Uber that first time. I blocked her and ran inside, haven't spoken to her since.
Storytime on how I found out my sister was actually my mom. My parents were much more older than me, and I always felt more distant from them than any of my siblings. I'm 17 years old. I grew with a big family. I have 5 siblings. My sister is 30, brother 29, another brother that's 29, and both of my sisters are 24 and 22. I always realized there was a big gap between me and the rest of them. I always figured that maybe I was an accident or unplanned. Being the youngest, I was spoiled all of the time. The way they treated me is how you would expect them to treat the youngest. My older sister Hannah always took care of me the best. I always saw her as a mother figure, never knowing that she was actually my real mom. She spent most of her time with me more than my other brothers and sisters. And she often took care of me when my mom wasn't there. And my parents were much more older than me, so I always felt like there was a distance between us. I ended up finding out Hannah was my mom after both of my parents passed away. If you want to know exactly how I found out, please come back for part 2. Part 2 on how I found out my sister was actually my mom. When my father passed away, it was probably the worst part of my life. I was 8 years old. I did not take it well at all. I cried for weeks and I went crazy. I threw fits at people. I know my siblings were all going through this just as bad as I was, but I made it all about me. I didn't consider them or what they had been going through the whole time. And recently, the same thing happened to my mom. It hit me just as hard, if not harder. She'd been sick for a long time and slowly getting worse. I wasn't ready for it at all. It was after this Hannah told me the truth. She sat me down and braced me that what she was about to tell me, I would be shocked. She knew that we all were still recovering from my mother's passing, but a few weeks had passed and she felt like it was enough time to wait before actually coming out with the truth. Sorry I can't do 3-minute long videos, but come back for part 3 if you want to know exactly how she explained that she was my mom. So, part 3 on how I found out my sister was actually my mom. She said she always wanted to tell me, and only now she could finally. When she was 13, as many stupid kids do, she had an unprotected ex with a boy, and she had got pregnant, and that child was me. At the time, her parents wanted to give her baby up for adoption, but she was unshakable and wanted to keep her child. She completely refused to give me away. They eventually agreed to keep me and would raise me in their household, but with their parents as the guardians, and I would grow up thinking that they were my real parents. Apparently, some of my older siblings also knew, but they never mentioned it. In fact, they're actually my aunts and uncles. My mother made Hannah swear that she would never tell me, and that she could only tell me after some time after her death. She said she wanted to die as a mother, not a grandmother. Hannah said all my life she wanted to tell me, but swore not to. And she was glad that she was able to tell me the truth. But if you want to know how I reacted to the whole situation, part 4 coming up.
Storytime about the day my husband attacked me and put me in the hospital. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, instead of me on Instagram. My husband and I had been married for 7 years. 3 years into the marriage, he started sleeping on the couch. We would constantly fight back then because of several things. Number 1, I knew he was cheating on me, but he would never admit to it. Number 2, I wanted to have children, but he didn't want to at the time. Number 3, he never wanted to spend time with me and always prioritized his friends. And this was around the time that he started getting physically violent. Because we'd already been married for a few years at that point, I never saw him as a violent person. It all started by him shoving me one time during an argument. But he shoved me so hard I fell to the ground and ended up bruising my chin. And even though this was a big problem between me and him, it became an even bigger problem between me and my family. As soon as my parents saw the bruise, they started accusing him of beating me. And of course, my first instinct was to defend my husband. My parents begged me to stay with them and I didn't. I went back to my husband and demanded an apology, but he wouldn't even look me in the face. He told me he basically did not care. Once he started sleeping on the couch, it was just like we were roommates. We stayed like this for years. Anytime we got into an argument, he would just look for something to throw at me. One day he threw a jewelry box at me and I ended up in the ER. And of course, the hospital thought it was my husband. So I lied and said that I tripped. And unfortunately, I went straight back to my husband. Part 2 is story time about the day my husband attacked me and put me in the hospital. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, instead of me on Instagram. After years of him pushing me, shoving me, throwing things at me, and even slapping me, I became so numb to it. It would get me really angry and upset at the moment, but as soon as he would apologize, we would just go back to normal. But even our normal wasn't normal. We didn't sleep in the same bed. He was never really home, and when he was always playing video games. This was also around the time that he lost his job, so for 5 years, I was basically the breadwinner. He told me he didn't want to get a job and he wanted to play video games. I didn't tell him anything because I didn't want it to turn into a fight. But I was angry at the thought that I had to now support him. But like I said, my parents did not like him at all. They knew something was up because I always had some sort of bruise. My parents made it a habit of showing up unannounced to our house. I was actually really grateful to my parents. This didn't upset me at all. But my husband, on the other hand, hated my parents. One day he asked me, why do they even care about you so much? You're not that important. Around a year ago, I started feeling really sick all the time. At the time, I didn't know why. One day, I walk into the kitchen and see my husband holding eye drops in his hand, but he quickly put it away. I asked him why he was holding that, and he said nothing, mind your own business. So I did. A few months later, I'm having a conversation with a coworker, and he told me a story about somebody using eye drops on someone else to make them sick. This is when it all clicked. I had all these weird stomach issues. and I never realized that it was him putting eye drops in my coffee. This is when I decided to file for divorce. Instead of filing for divorce and leaving him, I went home and told him that I was gonna get a divorce. He grabbed a hammer and started chasing me. I locked myself in the bathroom. Part 3 is up. Story time about the day my husband attacked me and put me in the hospital. Disclaimer is not my story time, it's me on Instagram. When I saw him grab the hammer, I started instantly running. I ran straight to the bathroom and locked myself. The good thing is that he would never damage this house because he does love it, so he didn't swing at the door. I stayed in the bathroom for an hour explaining to him why I wanted to get a divorce. After the 2 hours, I thought he had calmed down. He basically told me that he would give me the divorce with no problem. But let me remind you, I was the breadwinner and he had no job. He was completely dependent on me. But as soon as I opened the door, he pushed in and started hitting me. Unfortunately, I didn't tell anyone in my family what my plan was. Suddenly, I wake up and I realize I'm on the ground. 4 hours had passed. I get up and look at myself in the mirror, and my face was completely swollen. I walk into the living room and my husband was there playing video games, just like he did every day all day. As soon as he sees me, he says, "You better go wash your face." Instead, I grabbed my things and ran out. He didn't even bother chasing me. I called my parents on the way to the hospital and they met me there. Luckily, there was no major damage. My parents helped me file a police report. And when the police showed up to see my husband, he had cleaned the bathroom. Guess what he told them? That he was the one that wanted to divorce me because I was crazy, and that I had made up the whole attack. He says that I must have hit myself in the face. That's when the cops asked him, "How do you know that she was hit in the face?" Gotcha. He said he had assumed that I was being hit in the face. My brothers and parents went over and kicked him out. I sold the place and bought a house down the street for my parents. I am now so much happier. I feel like I'm aging backwards from not being around him. The constant fear and nervousness I felt around him took a toll on me, and I just hadn't realized it. To this day, he says he did nothing, and the cops have done nothing against him. I need proof, so what should I do? My mother-in-law is so terrible that I'm considering breaking up with my boyfriend. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it's me on Instagram. My mother-in-law has done everything in her power to separate my boyfriend and I. And though she doesn't admit it, she loves it. When my boyfriend and I started dating, we were both really happy, really loving and affectionate. We love to spend time with each other, so our relationship is really well-rounded. In fact, my boyfriend comes to my apartment every single day. Without me asking him, he always just wants to spend time with me. After 3 weeks of dating, we decided we'd meet each other's parents. Even though he was incredibly nervous to meet my parents, they went out of their way to make him feel at home. My parents had invited us over for dinner, and they literally made his favorite foods and even bought his favorite dessert. Needless to say, my parents loved him and he loved my parents. The following week, we met his parents. It went okay, I guess. His parents wanted to take us out to dinner, which was nice. His dad was super charismatic, funny, and made a lot of conversation. His mom hugged me and kissed me, so I thought she was okay. But throughout the dinner, she would kind of look at me and not really say anything. Basically, she only responded when my boyfriend talked. Obviously, I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I didn't tell my boyfriend anything. Next day, I get a text message from my mother-in-law. She asked me to have lunch with her. Just the 2 of us. Part 2 is up. Mother-in-law is so terrible that I'm considering breaking up with my boyfriend. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, send me on Instagram. She asked me out to have lunch by ourselves. I said yes. During the lunch, she took me to this really fancy restaurant, and she did not tell me that it was so fancy. So I showed up in jeans and a cardigan. As soon as she sees me, she says, "Oh, why didn't you wear a dress?" I told her I didn't realize the restaurant was so fancy, and I apologized. She said I was okay and for me to sit down quickly. By the way, my boyfriend's family has a lot of money, so she's accustomed to the, nicer things in life. Not so bad sitting in that restaurant with my cheap jeans and my cardigan, while everyone else was in dresses and beautiful sandals. We made small talk, and it was actually kind of nice. After we ordered, she started asking me questions though. She started asking me how many boyfriends I'd had in the past, what my friends were like, and she even asked me how much money I earned per year. She was clearly trying to find out if I was only interested in her son's money, which no, I'm not. Then she asked me if I wanted to have kids. I mean, this isn't even a conversation that I've had with my boyfriend yet. Said to have it with his mom felt just strange. I told her in the future I definitely wanted to have kids, but not anytime soon. That's when she said that's such a shame. I want grandchildren within 2 years. I laughed and told her that her son and I hadn't even spoken about marriage. We hadn't been together very long. When the bill came, of course I offered to pay for it, but she said, "No, darling, that's okay." But when she looked at the bill, she said, "Wow, that's a lot." Mind you, she was the one ordering the expensive drinks. An hour later, I got a text message from my boyfriend. He said his mom came home crying after having lunch with me. She told him that I was rude to her, that I didn't offer to pay. Part 3. Mother-in-law is so terrible that I want to break up with my boyfriend. Disclaimer, is not my story time, send me on Instagram. That's when my boyfriend told me that his mom came home crying after she had lunch with me. She said that I didn't offer to pay for the bill and that I was rude to her. Of course, I quickly defended myself and told him that never happened. I did offer to pay for the bill. He told me that I needed to give her some time. So a few days later, I went to their house and apologized to her personally. I told her that I was sorry if I had done anything to offend her. She told me that I just needed to be a little more sensitive. So after that, I did not speak to her at all. But she noticed every time I would go over to their house, she would make comments about my clothes, my hair. On one occasion, she hugged me and grabbed my arm. That's when she said, "Wow, from far away it looks like you're thin, but you don't feel very thin." I laughed hysterically. Obviously she wanted to hurt my feelings, but I just thought it was funny. One occasion she brought up my boyfriend's ex, only to insinuate that I wasn't as pretty as her. I laughed at her comment and didn't say anything. She once came over to my boyfriend's apartment while I was cooking and literally proceeded to take over and judge everything that I was doing. She told me that my food was too plain and that she felt bad for my boyfriend, and that obviously he had lost weight because of how terrible my food was. The last straw was when she told my boyfriend that I was talking to somebody on the phone. I told my boyfriend I was talking to my mom, and she told him that she thought it was a man. I know it's not my boyfriend's fault, but he always sides with her. I'm always at a loss. What should I do?
Guys, this is what I use over my makeup. It's SPF 50. It's by Garnier. It's an over makeup spray. It's not like a setting spray or anything. You just use it throughout the day to top up. It's only 3-star UVA. So when I use SPF in the morning, I make sure it's 5-star UVA and UVB. So this isn't 5-star, but it's better than nothing. It doesn't leave like a sheen or anything on your makeup. It feels really weightless. So just going to go ahead and spray it on. And it smells really nice. Like I said, it's really, really weightless. And yeah, I just think SPF is so important. So yeah, give it a try.
My boyfriend confessed to me that he's attracted to my best friend. Should I leave him? Disclaimer's not my story time. Send me an Instagram. I know you guys are gonna all say yes immediately, but hear me out. My boyfriend and I have been dating for 6 months. My best friend and I actually met him at a bar. That night, I never expected that he would ever come after me. I consider my best friend the prettier of the two of us, so I'm used to her getting hit on instead of me. But that night, my boyfriend came to me. He talked to me pretty much the entire night, and my best friend told me to go for it. So I did. He and I spent the night together, and after that, we were inseparable. To the point where he wanted me to move in with him after 2 months. My parents thought I was absolutely crazy and they didn't want me to move in with him, but I did anyway. I come from a Latino family, so this was absolutely reprehensible. I went against my family's wishes and they actually stopped speaking to me for a little bit, but luckily I got them back. My boyfriend during that time gave me all his support. He told me that my family would come around eventually and that they would see that we were in love. So living together was the logical next step. After 3 months of living together, I knew that I wanted to marry him, and he would talk about marriage all the time. He asked me what kind of ring I would want and what I would want for the proposal. We even started talking about our honeymoon. I was also starting to get in the best shape of my life. I was looking super snatched. My boyfriend told me that he loved the way that I look, but that he didn't want me to get skinny. Again, I just felt like he was supporting me and loving me. Around this time, my best friend started dating somebody. After a few weeks, they got really serious about the relationship. And of course, we went on double dates. After the third double date, I noticed that my boyfriend was getting a little annoyed. I got the feeling he was jealous of my best friend's boyfriend. Follow for part 2. My boyfriend confessed to me that he's attracted to my best friend. Should I leave him? Disclaimer's not my story time. Send me on Instagram. I asked him if he was jealous of my best friend's boyfriend, and that's when he said no. But every time we would go on double dates, he would get in such a bad mood. 3 weeks ago, my best friend told me that she was moving in with her boyfriend. And when I told my boyfriend that they were moving in, his face almost went green. I asked him what was wrong and he said nothing. After that, he went into the bathroom and didn't come out for 40 minutes. Again, I asked him if he was okay and he said yeah. And I sat him down and asked him to be honest with me. That's when he said, I'm attracted to your best friend. Instantly started to cry because I had already been suspecting it. He explained to me that he didn't have any feelings for her until she got a boyfriend, and that he felt that he had some sort of ownership over her. Before my best friend got a boyfriend, the three of us would hang out a lot, and not once then did I ever get a feeling that he was attracted to her. He told me that he would never act on his feelings, but he didn't want to go on any more double dates. I asked him if he wanted to be with her instead of me, and he said absolutely not. He said that I was the love of his life and that attraction only meant attraction, that he didn't have feelings for her. A few days later, he took me to the most expensive restaurant in our city and asked me to marry him, but I didn't know what to say. I can't stop thinking that he's attracted to my best friend. Part 3 is up. My boyfriend confessed to me that he's attracted to my best friend. What should I do? Disclaimer is not my story. I'm sending me on Instagram. After he proposed, I told him I didn't know what to say. He told me to think it over. I finally decided to tell my best friend what my boyfriend had told me. That he had confessed that he was attracted to her. First, she laughed. I told her no. I'm serious. He confessed that he's attracted to you. That's when she told me I needed to break up with him. That's when I told her that he had also proposed. And she said, well, then you really need to break up with him now. That's when she told me that she didn't want me to resent her and that it was completely out of her control. And I didn't. I promised her that I would never resent her for my boyfriend being attracted to her. It's not like she ever did anything on purpose to make him feel attracted. She also told me that marrying him right now would be rushing into it. And she's kind of right. We've only really known each other for 6 months. Then she told me that she's never gotten the feeling that he's attracted to her. She's never caught him looking at her or anything like that. So now her theory is that he's looking for an easy way out and that he probably wants me to break up with him. But my boyfriend is still sweet and super affectionate. He's constantly showering me with love. My best friend thinks that if I stay with him, our relationship will suffer. I've known my best friend longer. What should I do? Story time about how my fiance is refusing to help me plan our wedding. Should I leave him? Disclaimer is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. I'm so sad about the palette. My fiance and I met a few years ago through friends. When we first met each other, I had a really bad first impression of him. First off, he was completely up himself. All he did was talk about himself and never once asked me questions. We were surrounded by other people, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt when he asked me out. I said yes, but our first date was kind of the same. He only really talked about himself, his career, the things he likes to do, his favorite foods, his family, his dog. I eventually just started volunteering information because he wouldn't really ask me. After our date, I didn't speak to him for a full 2 weeks. I was really turned off by his attitude, but then he messaged me saying that he was really nervous and that he realizes that he probably could have been a little more talkative. I said, yeah, you could have been. I told him how I really felt and he did apologize and he asked me out to dinner again. This time I invited him to my apartment and he made us a full 4-course meal. By the way, he's a chef. Obviously, that night, I completely fell in love with him. He made all of my favorite foods, but the gourmet version. A few months later, we became boyfriend and girlfriend. There were still a few things that I didn't like about him, though. Like, he never really had anything to talk about other than himself. Exactly a year after we met, he decided to propose, and I said yes. But when I asked him to do things for the wedding, he says no. Part 2 is up. Story time about how my fiance is refusing to help me plan our wedding. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, I sent him on Instagram. To be honest, when he asked me to marry him, I was totally blindsided. Honestly felt like our relationship was starting to get stale. So when he asked me to marry him, I was like, for real? He told me that I was the first person who ever made him feel important. And looking back, I realized that it's because he only talked about himself and I really let him talk about only himself. Anyway, he immediately said yes out of the excitement, but when I called my mom to tell her, I was actually crying, which is like, okay, maybe I shouldn't marry him then. A few weeks into our engagement, we hadn't talked about planning at all. So I decided to ask him, like, what do you want the wedding to be like? That's when he told me that he didn't really care, but that he would just give me money for it. I mean, on one hand, that makes me really happy because I don't want my parents to have to pay for the wedding, and he has a lot of money. But on the other hand, I want him to be involved, especially for the food because he's a chef. I decided to hire a wedding planner because my job is extremely busy. I work in marketing. Asked him to go to a few meetings with me, he said no. When I finally found the perfect wedding planner, I asked my fiance if we could go have lunch with him, and he said no. This is when I blew up in his face. I asked him why he wasn't participating at all. That's when he told me that he was too busy at the restaurant, that he didn't have time to do anything with the wedding. I was like, okay, fine. When it came time to choosing the caterers, I demanded that he go with me. He told me that he would try to get off work, but he never did. Every time I tried to schedule it, he would say that he was busy with work. So when I told him that his restaurant, which is super fancy, should just cater the whole wedding, and he said no. He told me they were way too busy and ready to get a Michelin star, so there was absolutely no way they could cater his wedding. That's when he said, you can handle it, I trust you. I went home and cried the entire night. Part 3 is up. Story time about how my fiance refuses to help me plan our wedding. Claims to know my story time, I sent him on Instagram. After I got home and cried, he came home and asked me what was wrong. So when I told him that he didn't seem excited about the wedding, and that leaving all the planning to me made me feel like I was his employee, as if I had nothing better to do, which I do have my career just like he has his. Not to mention the fact that me picking everything I want for our wedding makes it feel like it's my wedding and not ours. He told me that I was overreacting. He also said that he was excited for the wedding, but that he was too tired and too busy to even think about it. That's when I told him that I was really busy and I was really tired too. And he begrudgingly told me that he would carve out some time this week so that we could speak to some of the caterers. I told the wedding planner and he started setting up some meetings. But of course, my fiance canceled on the first 2. He did show up to the 3rd one, but all he did was criticize the food. Then we went cake tasting. I expected this to be fun. When my friends have had cake tastings for their wedding, they always have so much fun. As soon as we showed up to the cake shop, he asked me, where did you find this? That's when I told him that our planner had found it. He said it looked like a supermarket bakery. That's when I told him that I don't mind supermarket bakeries and that it was probably just as good as a French bakery. He laughed and said, wow, you're funny, babe. We tasted the cakes and he actually liked them. Thank God. But then he requested to go to more cake tastings. We ended up going to 5 other places. This was already too much for me. I got a new account at work and I'm still trying to lose weight for the wedding. So him making me run around trying to taste cake is like the straw that broke the camel's back. After 2 weeks, we finally decided on a cake flavor. Most people must have fun planning their weddings, right? But I just feel like I'm drowning. I have to make all the important decisions on my own. I decided to involve my mom and sister and they've helped me so much. Of course, the wedding planner is helping me too, but ultimately the decisions have to be made by me. He hasn't made any effort to help me with anything else. Kinda want to break up with him, but I feel like this isn't a big enough reason to break up with him. What should I do? Am I the asshole for cutting off my jealous mom? When I was going through puberty, my mom started comparing my body to hers. She would say things like, you know what, it's okay that you're not developing as quickly as I did, or that her boobs were already much bigger than mine were when I was 14. Here's a little backstory on my family. My mom has always been extremely dramatic and I think toxic, but I feel bad calling her toxic. On the other hand, I have a great relationship with my dad, and my 2 siblings are both guys, so they don't have the same experience I did with my mom. My dad always acted as a buffer between me and my mom, even though my mom was the one that was starting all the fights. When I got into high school, I realized how attractive I was. Honestly, I had no clue that I was even a pretty girl. Looking back now, I realized that my mom really did make me feel like I was less than. When I started getting attention from boys in high school, I was really happy. I finally felt like I was seen. And because my mom wasn't there, I was able to thrive. Whereas in my house, I would even dress down in front of my mom just so that she wouldn't get jealous of me. The first time I brought a boy over to our house, my mom totally flipped out. She said that I was acting like an SLUT, but really, this boy was only a friend. My dad, thank God, told her that she needed to relax and that I was allowed to have friends. Eventually, I started dating a boy behind my mom's back. I did tell my dad, though. My dad was actually happy for me. This boyfriend was like my best friend. I could tell him everything, and he always responded really positively and gave me really good advice about my mom. But one day, one of my brothers let it slip that I had a boyfriend. My mom punished me for an entire month. My dad tried to intervene, but my mom went crazy. Here's the thing. She made me break up with him, and then I caught her flirting with him. Part 2 is up. Am I the asshole for cutting off my jealous mom? When I caught her flirting with my now ex, who she made me break up with, I pretended like I didn't hear her. But she was flirting with him. She told him that he had really good muscles and that he looked a lot older than he was. Thank God, my ex didn't respond and went home. Afterwards, I confronted my mom and told her that I overheard the conversation. She told me that I was being a snob. I didn't talk to her for about 3 days. On the 3rd day, she came crying to my room. She wanted us to make up. So she decided to take me shopping at the mall. Being the toxic person that she is, she managed to make everything about her. Tried on a bunch of clothes, which actually did look really good on her. Oh, By the way, my mom was a model back in the 90s, so she's kind of stuck in that mindset. She thinks she's the most beautiful person. She thinks she's the best. Anyway, when it was my turn to try on some clothes, she said that I looked a little too tubby, that I should maybe lose a few pounds. I told her that she hurt my feelings and she instantly apologized. Our relationship kept going like this up until I was 18. When I finally moved away for college, I was the happiest I'd ever been. Being away from my mom was like a breath of fresh air. But of course, it never stopped. My mom decided to come visit me to college and I knew that I needed to be prepared for that. When she came over to my dorm, I made sure it was super clean. Also, my grades were super good, and I basically had a few friends but no boyfriend. When she came over to my apartment, she was like, "Oh, it's so simple." I was like, "What do you mean?" She said that I needed to decorate and show my personality more. She stayed with me for a total of 3 days, and the whole time I was grinding my teeth. When she finally left, I was happy again. Then my dad came to visit. Hanging out with my dad was the best. Took me shopping for my apartment and made me feel so at home. My mom got jealous. Part 3 is... Am I the asshole for cutting off my jealous mom? Disclaimers is not my story time, it's that I mean Instagram. Then she somehow managed to get jealous that my dad and I were getting along super well. She called my dad while my dad was visiting me and threw a tantrum about how she needed him to go home. So my dad cut his trip short just to go be with my insecure mother. After that, I really didn't speak to my mom for about 2 months. I couldn't believe that she always managed to make me feel less than. And somehow she always made everything about her. I reached out to my brothers and asked them if they ever felt the same about my mom, and they said no. My mom was totally different with them. She took care of them and doted on them. Probably because they're boys and not me, because I'm a girl. One day I decided to call my grandmother and I told her everything. That's when my grandma told me that my mom has always been that way and that I just shouldn't take it personally. Apparently when my mom was growing up, she did not have any girlfriends. She always liked staying away from other women to not have any competition. But I told my grandma that she's my mom and that she shouldn't see me as competition. Grandma suspects that something is wrong with my mom, so, I don't know if she's bipolar or something, but obviously I can't diagnose her. Thankfully, I have other women in my life, my grandma and 2 of my aunts. They act like my moms more than my own mother. When I graduated college, I was actually engaged. My fiance and I bought a house and we started planning our wedding. And of course, my mom wanted to help me plan it. I really didn't want this, but I decided to give her a chance. But once again, she managed to make everything about her. The entire time, she criticized my choices, even my wedding dress, which I absolutely loved, and it really did look good on me. She told me I needed to wear something more flattering. And then she ended up wearing my wedding dress in a different color. After the wedding, I decided to tell my dad and my brothers that I was going to cut my mom off. My dad begged me not to, but I still went ahead and did it. I called my mom and told her that I needed some time apart from her and that I did not want her calling me. Of course, she pretended like she had never done anything wrong in my life and that she's only been the perfect dedicated mother that she wishes she could be. Instead of arguing with her, I told her to just give me some space. She agreed to it and I haven't spoken to her in about 3 months. My dad and grandma keep begging me to talk to her. I don't think my mom is sad at all. She's always posting to her Instagram. She goes to Pilates, brunch with her friends, and travels with my dad. I think she's probably fine. But what should I do? Fiance faked being rich just to get me to marry him. Should I leave him? My fiance has lied to me literally over hundreds of times. It all started when he and I met 3 years ago. I was turning 32 and going through a divorce, so I had no intention of ever getting into another relationship. At least not for a long time. Come from a really wealthy family, so I inherited a lot of money when I turned 18. That never stopped me from getting a job. I started working in fashion and it was amazing. Eventually I became a stylist and had my own business. My relationship with my then husband was not going well, so we decided to get a divorce. But my ex-husband and I never really had hard feelings and we stayed friends. The time I was living in New York and had tons of friends. Every single weekend I was going out. And since I was single, I literally had nobody to answer to. My friends and I would go to exclusive clubs and restaurants every single night. This is how I met my compulsive liar of a fiance. He was friends with somebody in my friend group. Now everyone in my group was pretty wealthy. We all drove expensive cars, owned our own businesses, and we worked really hard. One of my friends introduced me to him, and within the first 5 minutes of our conversation, he told me that he was a Calvin Klein model. Of course I believed it because he was really attractive. And he basically asked me how much money I made a year. And I was honest with him. I earned around 300 grand a year. That's when he told me that he was a millionaire. Follow for part 2. My fiance faked being rich just so that I could marry him. Should I leave him? Very first night I met him, he told me that he was a millionaire and that he was a Calvin Klein model. Of course I believed him because he was just that attractive. Then he asked me how much I earned per year and I told him the truth, $300,000. Look on his face was of utter shock. He told me he almost couldn't believe that I would make that much money. And he started talking about how he's a millionaire and he models and he travels around the world. I was actually impressed. Later that night I asked the friend that introduced me to him if it was all true. She said, yeah, he posts about it on his Instagram, so I think so. Went to the bathroom and started looking him up on Instagram. And it looked like it was true. He did model for Calvin Klein and was modeling around the world. But honestly, from his Instagram, I really couldn't gather if he was a millionaire or not. It's not like he was posting pictures of him in a Maybach or anything. That very same night, he asked me if he could come to my apartment and I said no. The very next day, he asked me out on a date and I said yes. Ended up going to a really fancy restaurant and he paid for the bill. When the bill came, it was over $1,000. Ordered so many things off the menu. What I really didn't like was that he barely touched any of the food. The rest of the week, he invited me to all these different restaurants. In our second week, I asked him if he wanted to come to my place to have have dinner, which he did. And the look of his face when he showed up to my apartment was like shocked. Finally, he asked me how much my rent was. That's when I told him I didn't pay rent. I owned the apartment. That's when he said, yeah, I own my own place too. And then I asked him, why haven't you invited me to your apartment? He said that he was getting renovations done. Exactly a month into us dating, he asked me to be his girlfriend and I said yes. Oh, I had not been to his apartment at this point. He had been paying for everything. Follow for part 3. Beyonce fake being rich to get me to marry him. Should I leave him? At this point, he had been paying for everything. Every single time we went to dinner, any date we ever went on, he paid for everything. About 2 months into our relationship, I asked him again if I could go to his apartment. That's when he made up another excuse. Told me the contractor that was doing all the renovations in his apartment basically bailed on him. So his apartment was basically in shambles. I told him that I actually knew a contractor who could help him out. And he told me not to worry about it, that he had it covered. The very next week, he had prepared an elaborate proposal. He took me to Central Park where he had a band. He gave me a 3-carat pink diamond ring. Of course, I said yes. I was so happy. Never thought I'd find love again. After the engagement, I told him that we should just move in together. That's when he said, perfect, I can move into your place next week. I was like, what? He said that he actually wanted to sell his apartment. So I said yes. And the very next week, he moved into my place. When he showed up to my apartment, he literally only had 2 suitcases. And most of the clothes were kind of old and raggedy. I asked him where all of his stuff was, and he said, this is it. That's when I started getting really suspicious. I called his modeling agency, and they told me that they hadn't worked with him in 3 years. So apparently he wasn't really a model. Confronted him and asked him what was going on. He confessed that he hadn't modeled in years. That when he met me, he was so impressed that he needed to tell me something to impress me. He told me he had a lot of credit card debt and that he actually couldn't afford the lifestyle he was showing me. Then he also told me that he never even had an apartment. He was sleeping on his friend's couch. I told him I couldn't marry him or trust him, and that he was probably only after my money. He swears that he loves me. No, he hasn't asked me for money, and he's offering to actually pay for rent. My friends and family think I should leave him, but I love him and I'm so attracted to him. What should I do? Storytime about how I kissed every teacher I ever had a crush on and never got caught. Disclaimers is not my story time, it's me on Instagram. Growing up, I was a spoiled brat. My parents gave me literally everything I ever wanted. For my 15th birthday, I told my dad that if he didn't get me a BMW, I would run away. So on my 15th birthday, I got the BMW. My parents never said no to anything. One time I told my parents I wanted to have a party at my house and they said no. I threw a tantrum and started to cry. My dad pulled out his credit card and told me to stop crying and I could go buy whatever I wanted. And I pretty much maxed out his card. He did punish me for a month, but all he really took away was the TV. As you can see, I was completely entitled. And yes, looking back, I would love to punch myself. I was a complete brat. When I got into high school, I went boy crazy. Parents told me they did not want me having boyfriends, but of course, I put up a fight. They had no choice but to let me have boyfriends. I would bring them over to my house all the time, and I would always take them up to my room and lock our door. My dad told me one time to open the door, and I wouldn't, so he just left me. Eventually, I got bored with all my boyfriends, so I would just break up with them. But one day, this new high school teacher comes in. We made eye contact for about 5 seconds. I was obsessed. Follow for part 2.
Tender touch, drunk love, staying up just to talk to you. You stayed in touch, 2 continents, through all odds. Seems every night, yeah, all the time I'm calling out to you. Seems every time I take a drink, I'm reaching out.
Storytime about how I kissed every high school teacher I had a crush on and never got caught. Disclaimer is not my storytime, it's me on Instagram. After we locked eyes for about 5 seconds, he looked away. But I was totally obsessed. He was like the most perfect guy I'd ever seen. And the first thing I did was go to his classroom. I knocked on the door and as soon as he saw me, he smiled and said, come in. We talked for about 2 minutes and he told me that he was only substituting. So I knew I needed to make my move really quick. Fortunately, I was not taking the classes that he was substituting, but I had to find a way to get close to him. So I started watching everything that he did. My school had a big outdoors area and there were lots of tables around. And I noticed that he would go behind the library to eat his lunch. So I started going behind the library to eat my lunch. I decided to get there before he did so that it would be a coincidence. As soon as he saw me, he waved, but he sat at another table. So I grabbed my food and went over to sit with him. That's when I started asking him if he had a girlfriend. He got super red. This guy was blushing. And I knew right away that he probably had a crush on me. He basically didn't give me a yes or no about the girlfriend, but I didn't care. But I didn't want to make my move right away. He said for the next 3 days I sat with him at lunch. Finally, he asked me, don't you have friends? And I said yes, but they're all annoying. That's when I leaned in for the kiss. And no, he did not pull away. The kiss lasted for about 10 seconds. As soon as we pull away, he starts looking around to see if anybody saw. And he told me that I need to find someone my own age. By the way, he was 24, I was 17. Next day at lunch, I asked him if he wanted to go to my car. And we ended up kissing 3 more times that day. That's when he asked me for my phone number. Follow for part 3. story time about how I kissed every teacher I had a crush on and never got caught. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, instead of my Instagram. As we were sitting in my car kissing, he asked me for my number. Gave him my number, and that's when he said that because he's only a substitute teacher, we could still hang out outside of school. And I said, of course. The following week, he was gone because the teacher he was substituting for was back. No, he never called me. A few months later, we had another substitute teacher, and this guy was also really good looking. He wasn't as good looking as the first one, but good enough to distract me. This time I got lucky. He was substituting for drama, and I took drama twice a week, so I knew that I was going to be seeing him often. First thing I needed to do was get him to notice me, but this took a lot longer than the other guy. For the first week, I would just try to talk to him, but he was not having it. He would literally tell me to just go sit down, but I couldn't give up. One day after class, I decided to stay late. I knew that he would be staying late as well, so I knew that was my in. I went up to him and asked him if I could help him out. He said yes, and he basically told me to put away some of the costuming. As we were doing that, I just started talking to him, and I swear to God, for a minute, this guy forgot that I was a student. We started talking about everything. By the end of the conversation, he told me that I was really mature, and that I made him laugh. So the next day, I stayed after school with him again. This time we were backstage organizing props, and we were completely isolated. That's when I told him that I thought he was really cute and that he was probably a good kisser. Then he walks up to me and kisses me. Oh my God, the butterflies in my stomach. When he stopped kissing me, I pulled him in and kissed him again. That's when he came to his senses and told me that I needed to go home. So I did, and the following week he was not there. Apparently he had a family emergency, but we know it's a lie. Looking back on my behavior, I'm totally horrified. Where did I get the courage to do all the things I did? I never spoke to any of them again, but I did see one of them on Instagram. I did not follow him. He's now got a big beer belly. Ew. Definitely don't do what I did. If I could go back, I would not have done it. Bye. I'm being accused of rape and I don't know if I actually did it. Am I the asshole? Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. This all started 2 years ago at a party. 2 years ago, my friends called me up and told me they had a party to go to. Ironically, I did not want to go to this party. I felt really tired from work and I just wanted the night off to chill. That's until my friend called me and told me that the girl that I liked would be at the party. Here's a little backstory on the girl and me. Her and I met through mutual friends, and from the moment that I met her, I really liked her. The night I met her, I asked her out and she said no. So I left it at that. Of course, my feelings didn't change for her. I still liked her. Anytime I would see her at parties or friends' houses, we would always chat. I never asked her out again, but she could clearly tell that I still liked her. I had a bad habit of staring at her. So when my friend told me that she'd be at the party, I decided to go. As soon as we got to the party, I saw that she was talking to this one guy. Now I have to confess, it made me really angry. This is when I decided to have a few beers. Now here's when things start going bad. I'm starting to get tipsy and my friends start telling me to go talk to her. I said no, but they insisted. Instead of sticking to my guns, I decided to do what my friends wanted me to do. I walked up to this girl, not even saying hello, and I said, "Are you dating this guy?" While this guy is standing right next to us. That's when she pushes me aside and says, "It's none of your business." Part 2 is I'm being accused of rape and I don't know if I actually did it. Am I the asshole? Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. That's when she pushes me to the side and tells me it's none of my business. That's when the guy that was standing next to her tells me to leave. So I did. I walked back to my friends completely defeated and embarrassed. I felt humiliated. Almost 5 minutes later, she comes up to me and apologizes. She said, "I'm sorry I pushed you." I told her it was okay and if we could just talk. We went to the backyard and I asked her why she wasn't interested in me. That's when she told me that she had been in an abusive relationship and she wasn't looking for anything else. I told her that I wasn't looking for a relationship either and that I just really liked her. Basically, I just wanted to hang out with her. She said she wanted to stay away from guys for now, and I said why. And that's when she kissed me. I was completely shocked. I was not expecting that. Now I could tell that she had been drinking too because she was a little tipsy, so I kissed her back. I could hear my friends cheering in the background. They're such idiots. So I asked her if she wanted to go somewhere more private. We ended up going to one of the bedrooms in the house, and we kept on kissing. At this point, she did not say no. It felt like she wanted it just as much as I did, and we went for it. And to be honest, it only lasted about a minute. After we finished, we kissed and we went back to the party. She held my hand for the rest of the night. In my eyes, things had gone pretty good. But then my worst nightmare began. Part 3 is up. I'm being accused of rape and I don't know if I actually did it. Am I the asshole? Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I repeat, this is not my story time. After we did the deed, she held my hand for the rest of the night. And there were witnesses to her kissing me and holding my hand that night. A few moments later, she completely disappeared. I didn't see her at all for the next 3 days. I decided to call her the next day, but she did not answer her phone. I also sent her messages, but she didn't text back. 4 days later, I get a knock on my door. And it's her dad. And that's when he told me that his daughter was accusing me of rape. I was in complete shock when he said that. Then he asked me what my version was. I told him exactly what happened and he said that she probably said no and I kept going. I told him that at no point did she say no and that people had seen us kissing and holding hands throughout the night. Then he said I took advantage of her being drunk, but she wasn't even that drunk. He also said she was probably so drunk that she didn't even realize she was holding my hand. Here's the thing. After he left, I sat down and started thinking about the entire night. And I really started thinking back. Did she say no? Did she tell me to stop? I was drunk at the time, but I swear to God she didn't, or at least I didn't hear her say it. Body language wasn't saying stop. Here's the thing. My parents have a lot of money. Now they're asking my parents to just give them lots of money and that they'll drop everything. My parents are just going to pay them the money. What should I do? Is it wrong that my boyfriend wants me to watch rape corn? Huge trigger warning here. Please do not watch if you are sensitive to this. Take care of yourselves. I love you. My boyfriend and I have been together for 8 months. I just turned 21 and he's 33. He's always kind of been the perfect boyfriend, but a few months ago he started acting more like my dad. Started with him just telling me what to do, and then eventually he started trying to give me advice about everything I did. For example, he'd tell me how I needed to talk to my landlord and small things like that. And now I feel like it's gotten to the point where he wants to completely control me. Now here's the thing. I'm young and I don't know if I'm just overreacting or if I'm reading too much into this, but I know that sometimes he makes me feel really uncomfortable. Only 2 months after dating, he asked me to marry him, and I didn't say yes right away, and this really upset him. He accused me of wanting to stay single so that I could date other guys. I told him that I thought I was too young to get married, and that we needed to get to know each other before we talked about marriage. But here's the thing. He started getting so upset that eventually I said yes. So as of now, we're kind of engaged, but I don't really want to. He wants us to go buy a ring, and he wants to formally ask my parents. I called my parents to tell him about it, and they were totally against the idea. I agree with my parents. I haven't told my boyfriend, but things get worse. Started showing me the corn he watches. When I didn't want to watch it, he got really mad at me. Part 2 is up. Is it wrong that my boyfriend wants me to watch rape corn when he wants to do sexy time? Huge trigger warning. Please don't watch this if you are sensitive. Take care of yourselves. I love you. I was laying on the bed and he flipped his laptop over. That's when he says, here, watch this. It was kind of like regular corn. Nothing too disturbing, but it made me feel really uncomfortable. Told him it looked funny and he said, why would it look funny? You don't like it? That's when I said, not really. At that point in my life, I had never looked up anything related to corn. It's not something that I was interested in. So I felt really uncomfortable. He turned the computer on and I couldn't see the screen anymore. For the next 3 hours, he stayed on his laptop in his room watching corn. I felt like I was interrupting him. I went to the kitchen and decided to cook. Dinner was ready. I asked him to come eat and he left me waiting another hour. When he finally comes out, his face was completely changed. And for the rest of the night, he was really quiet and kind of rude. A few days later, he brought up the engagement again. He asked me if I had time to go look at rings and reluctantly, I said yeah. He went into a jewelry store and he told me to just choose one. I told him that I didn't want to rush it and he said, it's fine, just choose it now. Later on that night, I asked him to drop me off at my place, but he said he wanted me to stay over at his. When we get to his apartment, he gets on his laptop again. That's when he shows me what he was watching. It was rape corn. He tried to kiss me and I felt sick to my stomach. Part 3 is it wrong that my boyfriend wants to watch rape corn when he wants to do sexy time? Huge trigger warning here. Please do not watch this if you are sensitive. Take care of yourselves. I love you. That's when he showed me the rape corn on his laptop. And he just lunged at me and tried to kiss me. I felt sick to my stomach. He asked me to sit on the bed, but I said no. That's when he said why. I told him I wasn't comfortable with what he was watching and that I really didn't like it at all. Then he just rolled his eyes and got mad at me. For the next 5 minutes, he called me a prude and told me that what he was doing was completely normal. And I guess part of me really did want to believe him and he managed to convince me. I asked him to close the laptop because I could hear the noise. He said I was overreacting and told me to go home. So I did. Didn't speak to him for 3 days until finally he came over to my place. He acted like nothing had happened. Now here's the thing. I don't know if it's a normal thing or not, but I don't think it is. I haven't Googled it or anything because I don't want to, but I also haven't talked about it to anybody. What scares me is that he's gonna want to do stuff like that and I'm not comfortable with it. It also concerns me that he has fantasies about that. That's something I would never ever want him to do. I made us dinner in my apartment and I decided to bring up the topic. That's when he said, can you just get over it? It's done. But I kept pushing and asked him some questions. I asked him how long he'd been watching that and if it made him, you know what. He said he'd only been watching it for a few days and that he already stopped and that he wouldn't do it again. Then he said, you have to stop being a prude. I want to be with somebody who's willing to try new stuff. Otherwise, I'd probably end up cheating. This actually really scared me, so I told him that I would try anything as long as I was comfortable with it. I don't want him to leave me because I do love him, but what he was watching on his laptop really made me nervous. I don't think I have the courage to break up with him or anything, and I do want to be with him. I just want to find a way to help him with this and not make it a big deal. I haven't told anybody in my family or my friends. Maybe I should just to see what their reaction is. What should I do? Bye.